Okay, so first off, nice job getting started. For anyone who's listening to this meeting tonight, it was really a pleasure to read through most everyone's submission and to provide some feedback. It was a good turnout, the way I look at it. And I look at this course, the way it's designed, as getting all the little nilly stuff out of the way in the beginning of the course, so that at the very end of the course, when you have really most of your deliverables, you have your, 50% of your, well, actually more than that, 60% of your grade is still outstanding, from participation to the white paper, completed white paper, and of course the small little reflection that you do at the very end. What I like to do is sort of, be a little more nitpicky in the beginning, so we sort of get that out of the way, so that when you submit the white paper, which is much heavier weighted, you will be very successful. This first assignment isn't very heavy. It's only 15% of your grade. If you didn't get the grade you were hoping to get, keep in mind, it's just 15% of your grade. No one in my mind is in trouble so far in this course. So anyway, I wanted to start there. But I wanted to review some things. If I could get the thing to advance. Come on, there we go. I wanted to return to the course objectives to make sure that we understand what, in fact, is the point of the whole course. So remember, you have been reading earlier in the semester the theoretical constructs of change management and links to complexity theory. You haven't written about those things yet, but you will in your final white paper. Differentiate the critical elements of successful outcomes in organizational process change. Demonstrate effective communication skills using a variety of written, verbal, and electronic formats. I think there I just want to underscore that written is really an important part of this course. I know we've had a couple opportunities to speak with each other verbally, either having one-on-ones or having these, Zoom meetings, and of course, electronic formats, which is still writing. So this course is really centered on the writing, so that we know you can leave GW with a degree that's going to be useful to you when you need to communicate change, which is of what this course is really all about. Demonstrate the ability to conceptualize and synthesize information as acts and components of critical thinking and decision making. Develop and defend a proposal for initiating a key strategic change initiative, which is your white paper. You're going to, in the latter parts, which you haven't submitted yet, will be actually making a proposal, based on your topic, saying, and this is how I think we should do this, whatever it is, the problem that you have chosen. And then we've been participating in interdisciplinary teamwork and colleagues focused on patient-centered care, et cetera. That's why we have an opportunity for you to review each other's papers and to give critical feedback and productive suggestions to better the work of others as well. Let's talk a little bit about challenges and barriers. So we have a couple people here on the call tonight. What did you find most challenging about what we've done so far? So if you just want to think about that for a second, and whoever wants to go first, what have you found most challenging with this project so far?
I think, at least for me, in terms of technology, a lot of I would say, recent, in my experience working with tech and getting provider buy-in and organizational buy-in with leveraging technology and the expensive part of it, is a lot of the research that I found was centering around COVID, because a lot of, I feel personally that technology kind of catapulted after COVID. And so there isn't really a lot of historical research, I think, that exists. So for me, I think it's still kind of like, I don't want to say trendy, but it's something that I think can be leveraged in my kind of like what I'm researching. Um, because a lot of organizations are still trying to get back to pre-pandemic levels.
Right.
Um, and so I think that was like the most challenging, is that there weren't a lot of like concrete peer-reviewed articles. Like there were some that exist, but a lot of them heavily relied on like the pandemic and things that happened as a byproduct of that. So I would say for me, that was the most challenging, is
Right.
not a lot of granularity and information that exists.
I think if you notice, the sort of topical prompts are really, in many ways, all in flux. They're very hot topical areas in healthcare right now, some of which is literally unfolding in front
Right
of our
now.
eyes day by day. Those of you who have chosen something in the area of artificial intelligence or technologies, that's changing literally every day. I mean, I read the Chronicle for higher education, and there's always an article now every time it comes out about AI, about technology, how that's affecting mostly higher education, but also, of course, for you folks, how it's affecting the workplace. And like you said, COVID is sort of shaken up the box. It's sort of like everything was neat and tidy, and then COVID came along and everything got really complicated. And I don't think all the pieces have settled to the bottom yet. We're still, working with that, and we still don't know what the long-term effects of the whole experience are going to be. Not just you know, the viral history, but also the sort of how this is going to affect all of us as we continue to work, as we come up with new ways to reach patients, new ways to support systems, et cetera. So absolutely, if you looked at the prompts, they are sort of all cutting edge, which of course requires some change by leaders like yourselves as you either go back to your existing physicians, or if you decide, now that I have my master's degree, I'm looking for a new challenge, you'll be the person that folks look to for how we're going to do this, whatever this is, how we're going to affect change. Emma, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, actually, in contrast to what Anasia was saying, with my topic being leadership, a catalyst for change, I do believe that currently there's so much focus on issues surrounding COVID-19, and technology is great, but the route that I'm taking with my paper specifically deals with humanistic interaction and actual leadership issues that I think the best articles I've found were in the early 2000s, which I found was quite startling to me, because I feel like it's a current topic, but it's almost like nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to write about it.
That's a really interesting observation. A lot of, I would say, leadership studies in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s really had sort of a burst of, enthusiasm. Not that no one cares about it anymore. It's just that there was a lot of literature around that time. And it was because we shifted away from this idea that there are leaders and followers, and that leaders are just leaders. They don't have to worry so much about everything else that's going on, to things like complexity leadership, shared leadership, distributed leadership, which really, for those 30 years, the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, there was a big a burst of interest in this idea that leadership is not just about an individual and leading other people, but rather leadership is a thing that we're all part of.
Right.
So I think that might be where you might be seeing the shift, and maybe in the 2010s, there may not, it sort of may have fizzled a little bit in the sense that there wasn't a lot of new, not as much new stuff to say. I think, on the other hand, based on some of the problems that you all have chosen, it requires a fresh look. So how now do we lead disparate groups where people work in a hybrid fashion, where even if you're a clinician, where you might see patients either face to face or in telemed or through other types of technologies, but your support system is totally remote. Those folks aren't even, they don't even come to the office anymore. So I think it deserves a look again as to how this shift in the way that we understand caring for people in a post-COVID world
Right.
actually is challenging leadership again. It's sort of
Yeah.
challenging it again and saying, how are we going to get through this? So I think there's two sides to what you're saying. I definitely agree that there was a heyday and now we're sort of after the heyday, but I think the new experience is, how do we lead in this new changed world? I mean, I don't know how many of you have experienced a change in work style. I don't know if many of you work from home. I think, in Asia, don't you work from home?
Yeah, I was going to say that. So I've been working remote since 2017,
Okay.
and I think there is a large gap in the healthcare industry. And what I mean by that is you have like baby boomers, and then you have like a really like young population coming into healthcare. And I think there is a lot of conflicting ideas in terms of what is productive and what productivity looks like and how to motivate
What goals
people,
are and what goals are
what
and
goals are, like how you
absolutely.
can do things. Cause I know like when I worked for an organization in DC, they wanted bodies in the office
Yep.
and it didn't matter. Like, they just want to see you in the office. And
Just say
so
you
for
in the office.
me, as someone who was an analyst back in that time, I wasn't patient facing and I had to like advocate for myself. Like I literally, all of my calls are on WebEx. Like I don't interact with anyone. I'm in my office for 7 hours a day. The other hour I'm gone. So I think that is something like worth exploring, is like how to navigate remote workers, as someone who's been remote since 2017 and wears t-shirts like this to work every day. um, and
No, it's a real it's a new world. Not to mention, I think, and I don't want to sound like an old fogey here, but the millennials have a different expectation of what it means to work. And certain, sectors like health and higher education, even commerce now, it seems like they're pulling everyone back. I mean, I don't mean like people that work in restaurants. I mean like, finance and commerce are pulling people back, saying, no, we want you back in the buildings. So we have definitely this sort of new landscape to cope with. And I think it really is going to challenge again what our leadership concerns and change management techniques should be, because it's not, I don't think it's ever going to go exactly back to the way it was before. Not sure how it's all going to pan out, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to go back.
You both had very valid points, and I see both of them. And what's interesting is that what I was trying to focus on with my research was reactions to actions that are taken. And there's not much because it's more like a he said, she said status. But like you touched on, 30 years ago, there was a focus on this leadership movement, but there hasn't been since. And now we're in an age where technology has taken off. We're improving our care, we're improving our efficiency, and we have a workforce that, one, understands it, has been raised on it, two, is not intimidated by it, but they are being led by individuals from 30 years prior that do not want to assimilate, do not want to get with the times. And I think everybody blames the mass exodus of nursing individuals from healthcare to COVID, and it did play a large role in it. However, at that same point, even like Anasia said, she was remote a couple years prior to
Yeah.
the pandemic. That's where the shift was going, or the technology and the charting and everything. And it all plays a large role. And it's easy to blanket, oh, this happened only because of X, when actually it
Right.
was
It
X,
was
Y, and
already,
Z.
it was already simmering
It was in motion.
before. It
Yeah,
was
So
in
it was
motion.
definitely like a pot on simmer that was getting ready. You know, when you're cooking like spaghetti or something and
yeah,
it's about to just
Yep.
overflow.
I'm
So
hoping to see research now that I'm geared towards, I only read research papers these days. I really hope that soon there will be some peer-reviewed studies out that give validity to these.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say just observances that I have or that you all have,
Yeah.
but actually, put
If
rationale or reasoning to them.
If you're interested in continuing to keep an eye on where this all goes, I would highly recommend keeping an eye on the Academy of Management and their journals. They have several journals, and those journals are the ones that are really dedicated to doing this type of research when it comes to leadership, management, change, etc. So that's the Academy of Management. And then there's other journals like Change Management, for instance, is another journal. So as you sort of wrap up this course and go back into nature, as I say, higher education is not the jungle. The jungle's out there. Higher education is sort of like a safari where you get to just sit in the Jeep, but eventually you need to go back into the jungle.
Yeah, the only reason that I wanted to bring this up today is I met a lady who's there at the hospital training on a piece of equipment, and
Mhm.
she actually stepped away from management during COVID
Mhm.
and went back into the clinical setting as a trainer because she was not allowed to lead in a progressive manner. She was not allowed to change. She didn't have anybody that supported her moves. And she said she was a manager for 15 years and still could not get her organization to see the perspective she was presenting from what she had learned. And I asked, it was funny because we're kind of switching roles. She went 100% back to clinic, and I want to go into upper management. And we kind of exchanged ideas. And she said, I wish I had had that drive 15 years ago, because I had the mindset of, you've reached this position, don't make any ripples in the water. And she
Right.
said when it came time to push back, and I did, it wasn't well received.
yeah.
So it is definitely a shift, and everybody's dealing with it in unique ways. So that was my experience today.
Good. Excellent. Thank you both for your insights on this. Let me move on a little bit. Forgive me if I keep looking at my phone. I'm just seeing if anyone's emailing, like they can't get in or something like that. Let's talk about some of the challenges and barriers I found in some of the work I read. This is not geared towards any one person, it's just general things. First, I want to talk about the importance of a title. I know you've been thinking in light of your sort of umbrella term, those topical areas that you've chosen something to research. As you now are writing, you're actually addressing a particular problem. So it's really important to the reader to sort of be sort of tipped off as to what it is you're going to talk about. So it could be in a certain health profession, it could be in a certain health setting, it could be disease or disorder related. It just gets the person in the right space. Just like when you search for literature, you're like, oh, I haven't even read this article and that title sounds interesting. So I just wanted to encourage everyone to really think about titles that are unique and not just the title that is sort of the umbrella term for the assignment. And I found a couple that I thought were really good. So I just wanted to shout out to Emma. I thought hers was really good, addressing the employee's emotional response and hesitancy towards change, a leadership initiative. That is very clear to me what I should expect out of this paper. And Louise also did a really great title by saying Advancing Employee Engagement in Medical Assistance Environment. Got it. It's about how we're going to get employees to be more engaged in a very specific environment, medical assistance. I just wanted to throw that out there because many have not yet chosen a title, and I notated it on your papers, and I think it's just a really important thing. Imagine if you were going to send a report to a VP or your boss or whatever, you want to get their attention in one sentence or whatever, in a title of something, so they can, say, oh, is this what you're trying to get across to me? And it just sort of encapsulizes what the rest of the, whoops, come on, there we go. APA 7, okay. I know, I'm giving everyone headaches about this. First off, why do we get so crazy about citations and references? Like, who really cares? In writing, it doesn't matter if it's the voice you use, first person versus second or third person, or if you're citing things in the body of your text, or you're producing a reference list or bibliography. The rule of thumb is always consistency. APA is not the only style sheet out there. In fact, there's so many, sometimes it makes you crazy. Because different journals that I write for have different styles. Now, I use EndNote, which is a software program that sort of handles it all for you. It's a little front end heavy in putting in the data, but once you just choose, make this all APA 7, the magic of the software does it for you. So there's others. There's RefWorks. There's one I can't remember. It just went out of my Zotaro. So if you think about these in the future, they really cut down the work. And if anything, if you're writing, it doesn't really matter if it's APA. Clinical Research and Leadership has chosen APA. It could be Chicago, it could be MLA, it could be Harvard, it could be Vancouver. These are just all different styles. You may be thinking to yourself, why are there so many styles? I don't have the answer to that. Some sciences would prefer not to see the author in the text. They just want to see like a superscript number, because it's too, the social sciences tend to want to see, well, whose writing are you talking about? But anyway, that's an aside. The point here is consistency. So when you're reading, you want to make sure that citations look the same as you go through it. And as you know, APA 7 has a strict style sheet for that. And also your references, those that appear at the end. And if you're interested in what the differences are from the last version of APA, which was the 6th edition, to the 7th edition, you can go to this site. You can click it here on the, but when I post it, you might not be able to click it. So I wanted to make sure that you had the, and this is Walden University. They just have a nice site which shows you the differences. So if that's helpful, instead of losing your mind looking through the paper manual, go for it. But I think in just about every draft, I had something to say about APA style, okay? Sorry, here we go. I want to talk a little bit about writing style and logic. So I read some papers that really, after reading the first 3 paragraphs, I really got the problem, and I really understood why it was a problem and why it was an important problem. In other papers, I read the first couple paragraphs and went, so where are they going with this? So ultimately in this paper, the parts that you haven't written yet are going to provide a solution from what you now know about leadership management and change and complexity science to sort of inform that problem. So we want to know right up front, what is the problem you're exploring? Why is it important? and read it to yourself. I find oftentimes when I'm struggling with how I'm going to get a point across, I just read it out loud and see if it makes sense. Or if you have somebody in your household, some victim, you can say, read, read these 3 paragraphs or this 1 paragraph. What do you think I'm saying?
My
Because
husband
it
hates
really should
listening,
be-
so I
Pardon
get
me?
it. I
Yeah.
said my husband hates listening. He's getting his degree alongside me. He's already done his master's. He doesn't want any more.
But ask them, what do you think I'm saying? And let them respond in lay terms, and that'll give you an inkling as if you're being clear enough. And, you know, ask them, do you know what the problem is? See what they say. Do you know why the problem's important? See what they say. Because that really sets up everything that's going to follow, okay? When it comes to the literature, now, most all of you have chosen 2 or 3 areas of, you know, literature, disciplines that and themes that you want to focus on, okay? Think of literature as weaving something together, like a basket or a fabric or something like that, rather than it being a continual line of thought. Now, what I mean by this is that if this were an annotated bibliography instead of a literature review, you would take an article, and here's article A, whatever it is, and you would write everything about article A that's important. Then you would go to article B, and you write everything that's important from article B. And then you would go to article C, but that's an annotated bibliography. What we're doing here in a literature search is showing the literature that's out there, and not all the literature in the world, just some. You know, we're not here to write your doctoral dissertation, just some. And then help the reader know that you're looking at these critically. So one article may say one thing while another article agrees or disagrees. And show the reader that you're looking at the literature critically, not just here's one article and this is what it said. Here's another article, this is what it said. Because in some cases it comes off, and if this were in academic writing, we would call that sort of a bias. So you've chosen one author that you really like, and you're going to stake your whole perspective on that one author. Actually, what you want to do is, you know, even if it's just 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs, show how different people have different takes on the thing that I'm talking about, whatever it is, you know, artificial intelligence. Well, here are 3 or 4 authors. Some are saying the same things, some are saying opposite things, and maybe this is where they all agree, common denominator is, or whatever you're working with, okay? And then lastly, I read a couple papers where people are referring to articles, but never really tell us what the article's saying. So they'll say, you know, Latrecchiano, Hickman, and Stinson, sorry, have come to the conclusion that leadership is important to change. Okay, well, what's the conclusion that they came to? So it's not really telling us, it's like, well, what conclusion? Or if there was a research finding, what's the finding? So it's sort of like doesn't give us enough of the story. It's just saying this article is a good example of why leadership is important to change, but why? What did the authors say? Now, it doesn't mean you have to regurgitate everything, but if there's an important aspect, and this is where your matrix is helpful, go back to that matrix and say, okay, what did I get from this article that made it really seem important to me for this paper? And Aisha, go ahead. Oops, you're muted.
Sorry. I thought that was a good point, Professor, in terms of how to weave together in some of that content. I guess for me, it goes back to the original challenge that I was referencing, that some of the research, and maybe I can just be explicit here. I kind of like alluded to this a little bit in my literature overview about the difficulties in searching for certain aspects that I think it's like common terminology in healthcare, but it's considered something different on the research side. A challenge that I'm having is that with telemedicine specifically, and care coordination via telemedicine is that a lot of my research supports that it does reduce or provides an avenue for preventative care services, but it doesn't tell me specifics. Like it's more so like general,
Right.
like,
And
hey,
that
we've done this study.
and that would be your
So
criticism. That would be
okay.
Asia's criticism that,
Okay.
you know, even this article or these sets of articles do not provide appropriate suggestions for how we actually do this. See, that's the critical part. So you're actually reading what you're reading and saying, oh, this is really good. And I think that's really well thought out, or no, it just sort of scratches the surface. It doesn't give us the bigger story, which is what we need. And that's,
Right.
and again, as a writer, you can only report on what, research articles say. Like there's an adage in research, when you review something and someone says, well, you didn't, go after this set of questions. And usually the answer is, well, because I didn't ask those questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm only answering the questions I came up with. So yes, the world is a big world, and there's probably 2 billion questions related to this topic, but I just chose 2. That's what I'm answering. So that doesn't mean that the article is worthless. It just means that the authors stayed within their parameters. But if you feel that's part of the problem, that some of
Right.
the literature is not specific enough to say, well, how do we do it? Or what
Right.
are the details? Or, who are we talking about here? Are we talking about the West Coast, the East Coast? Or are we talking about Canada? That's the critical part of your review. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm writing myself a note. Um, but no, I agree. And that's something that I found particularly, like I said, this telemedicine and the encouraged use of telemedicine and AI is very like hot and trendy. And, it's like,
Mhm.
so I think like the peer reviewed information and in terms of like the true impact from a preventative stance
Mhm.
is going to be highlighted maybe 5 or 10 years from now when
Right.
there's actually substantial
Right.
years to be able to look over a period in time and say, hey, wow, through this use over the last 10 years, this is what we've been able to see. But it's really
But I
hard to.
think, but I think there's also, I agree with you there, because, information sort of sometimes strolls down the street instead of runs
Yeah.
down the street. I think, however, on the other hand, because this is such a hot topic, there's a lot coming out like every day. So you
Yeah.
have to sort of balance that out. It's like we always can't wait. So I use this example a lot. Isn't it interesting how quickly we got things done during COVID that we said we could never get done before? It was just not
Yes.
possible, right? Okay, so it's because all of the sudden, this is like, all hands on deck. Whoever
Yeah.
has an idea, throw it in the pot and
See what
just
sticks.
see what sticks, right? Even the FDA, which can be notoriously slow, magically managed to get things through. So we look at that experience now, a year out from the height, or year and a half now, I guess, out of the height of it, and we have one perspective. 20 years from now, we're going to have another perspective, but there's
True.
still a perspective to work with. So in
Yeah.
your case, when it comes to useful technologies for equity and inclusion, right, which is what you're working on, what do we know now? I know tomorrow there'll be another AI paper out. I know the next week there'll be another AI paper out. But what do we know right now that's helpful to this discussion?
Yeah.
And that's all any of us can do.
True.
As scholars, that's the only thing we can do, is report on where we are at this point in time. And then in 5 years, it's like, okay, let's revisit that because we have new experiences.
True. Thank you.
These are sort of just reminders. I know this sounds like I'm advocating for, study for the test instead of just study, but the rubrics are there to help you. The latter parts of the paper, I think it's sections F through H or whatever it is. The latter part, when you look at the rubric, is there to help you focus and make sure you're meeting the requirements of what the expectations are for the course. So when I look at your work, I'm looking at the rubric at the same time. You know, I might have my own little idiosyncrasies, but I'm really following the rubric. And that's what's going to help you make sure that you're meeting the mark. You know, it doesn't mean necessarily that, you know, it's going to be perfection. But what I'm looking forward to, as I've said a number of times, is improving, really measuring what you've learned from assignment to assignment. That's really what I'm looking for. So even the posts of the drafts to the discussion board, and I hope everyone's done that. I looked and it seemed like there was one or two missing. I have a couple people that asked for an extension, but I still thought there was a couple people missing. So please make sure, if you're listening to this, to post those so the other people can complete their assignment by Friday. I know it's all moving very fast, but that's how these 8-week courses tend to work. So we want you to give feedback to 3 other people's work. You know, be critical, but also provide productive commentary. And that is really what I'm looking for, that you just don't sign on and say, I read your paper, really liked it, good job. Rather, help each other by, one, using what you've learned so far to help other people improve their paper. And of course, in reverse, you know, it's sort of a team sort of way of helping each other sort of finish the race and get over the finish line together. And I hope that's something that you've experienced a lot of in the programs that you've been in, because in CRL, we really advocate for that.
When we go to review others' papers, Dr. L, initially I thought it said to review the ones in the group that are similar to what I read about. Now,
you don't have to do that.
Okay.
I thought about that, and I thought about it, and I was like, you know what, actually, somebody might want, you know, change and read something different that they didn't get a chance to dive into. So that's why, and I think I said it in my video this week, there's just one discussion board. I'm just looking that everyone respond to 3 people. Okay.
Okay. And that's
because
due
I
by
think there's something
Friday.
to be learned. I think there's something to be learned if you read somebody else's work that is not your area.
Right.
You can learn something that you weren't even thinking about.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
And then questions. we had a good discussion in the beginning, but is there anything the two of you have questions about that we should talk about? We have a few more minutes till the end of the hour. Anything you're unsure of, or you don't know you're unsure of yet?
I do have one question.
Sure.
When you were talking about like synthesizing and multiple articles or even conflicting views, there was one comment on one of my sources in text that said, I think you wanted to tell me not to put the name of the article in there.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
let me speak to that for a minute. It can become, there's some things that can become overwhelming after a while. So one is if you use a lot of quotes. So in the end, it's sort of like you start getting tired of reading somebody else's words. And it just sort of, after a while, it's like, okay, but what does the author think? Meaning you, the person writing the paper, what do you think? And sometimes people will choose a quote. It's like, well, you couldn't have just said that a different way. It's not that special. You know, it's like, it doesn't have to be in the words of the, you know. And then I find the other thing that can be taxing is reading over and over and over again in, you know, Latrecchiano's article, and then the whole, you know, the whole title, unless it's really like pivotal. Like I think I can count on one hand in my entire career when I've actually done that, because the article was so well known, and people should recognize it as a real go-to. Somebody here that I can't remember included the Hippocratic Oath or something as part of, was that you? Okay. You know, we know what the Hippocratic Oath is. It's like, okay, it's there as sort of like something to just sort of jar our memory. And it's like more of a metaphor than it is a fact. It's reminding us of something. We all know what it is. Somebody else that I can't remember put at the beginning of their introduction a quote by the physicist who died. Oh,
It was Anne Louise's paper.
Yes, it was Anne Louise's paper. Hawking's. And it was just sort of like to get us in the mood. Like, and that's, you know, that's great. I think when you're reading along and after a while, it's sort of like, I've just read, you know, 5 names of articles in a row. I'm not sure it's that helpful to the reader. I think it's sort of a distraction because that's what the citation is for. So that's just my, you know, like it's not everything's not a deduction. It's not really a deduction. It's just sort of like, well, if you were writing this for even a professional, you wouldn't be doing so much of that, and you would hardly ever do it in an academic or scholarly article.
Good. I just wanted feedback on that. Honestly, I try to avoid doing that. And the only reason that I did on one article was because, like you said, it was just something that I had in my notes over and over again, cite this article, cite this article, cite this article. And it's funny, I think I'm going to focus my whole paper around an article. And then I realized that I really didn't. I pulled tidbits that were relatable. So I was like, that was a good article. So I referenced it because I felt like I kept quickly referencing authors, but not, I was like, how do they know the power behind that article? So I just threw it in there.
Yeah,
And then it said,
I mean, remember, you're, by the way, I'm working on a paper right now that with 2 other colleagues, that the subject that we're writing on, another group of colleagues who we know actually published before we did. It's actually like the same idea, but we actually really disagree with the idea. So we're writing it, and we actually mention that article so the reader understands we're sort of responding to something. And now I still haven't written out the name of the article. I've cited the person, you know, or the people. And I understand sometimes you find that golden article. It's like, this is the one. This sort of puts everything into perspective. But don't forget, you're doing a literature review. So it can't be just dominated by one voice. It has to be sort of a blending of voices.
Right.
The reader is depending on you to tell us, okay, what's the hubbub about? Like, what's everyone saying about this? Not what is one person saying about this.
I did appreciate that feedback because never before had I been told either to put it in or not. And I didn't take it as super critical. I just wanted to clarify it.
It's more an issue of style. It's not wrong. It's just sort of one of those things that after a while it gets sort of tiresome if it comes up over and over again, like the name of this article.
Right.
Next thing you know, a quarter of a paragraph is dedicated to just titles.
There were 2 articles I did not even finish reading because I could not go 4 words without having a long citation, and it was just back to back to back. And I couldn't follow it for the fact that how it was sourced in text citations. Not only were they long, they were different than what I was used to, but then, like you said, I felt like there were no words that were personable.
And
so
that,
I couldn't
and that sometimes you come across that golden point where it's like, I can't say this better than the person who said it.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. But if 3/4 of your paragraph is quotes from somebody else.
Right.
It's like, wait a second, what does Emma think? Like, it's everything
Right.
that somebody else thinks,
Yeah.
It's not a violation. It's sort of like a style thing. It can be cumbersome.
Yeah.
It's not wrong. It's just sort of, you can improve on that, I think. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for
Sure.
clarifying that.
Sure. Yeah, everything's not about a violation. That's not what we're doing, really. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I had a question.
Something.
I know like Bosma, I think if I'm not mistaken, left feedback on my paper. And a point that she mentioned was something about like incorporating leadership into my paper. And I just wanted to ask if that was something that I don't want to say was necessary. Obviously, it adds an additional layer of complexity, but I didn't do a lot of research into like the healthcare organization mindset of like incorporating this change. And
Yeah, all of you are in different places, the way that you're sort of packaging what you're thinking, right? So now the latter part of the paper, which is so how do we do this? Like, how do we make a dent in this? That's coming from your coursework, your course readings, right? So when you look at that rubric, you'll see the last, I don't know, whatever it ends up being, the last third of the paper, is your opportunity to say, okay, how does the course reading help me figure out how to deal with this? It might be a very complex situation. And what is complexity theory? How does that help me figure this out? What does the change management literature help me to figure this out, et cetera? That's where you're going to integrate not what your topic was so much, but now you're going to use that literature from the beginning of the semester in a more applied way. So
okay.
the problem, and now that's in the beginning, the problem, and at the end is, and this is how we're going to provide somewhat of a solution using the management, leadership, and complexity. It's the more applied part.
Yeah. And that's okay. So that to me makes sense because
Yeah.
a lot of my area, like my personal favorite leadership style is transformational leadership.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think even for what I'm trying to do, like in terms of transforming health related outcomes, I think you're going to have a certain level of that inspirational and motivational aspect to get
Right.
providers invested. And so
Right.
that's something that I can definitely weave into and incorporate. I
Yeah.
haven't taken a look at the master rubric.
And I don't want to, I didn't take a look yet at what Bosma said. Bosma's on like a totally different timeline than we are, so I don't know when she did it. I haven't looked yet. But I mean, just take criticism as constructive criticism. If she didn't spot it, it doesn't matter. You still have an opportunity to, but I don't want I don't want to confuse you. You have the latter part of the paper, which you haven't written yet, to address that. You don't have to go back and,
incorporate it.
Right,
Okay.
right. I mean, you might want to put, I always appreciate where at the end of an introduction, it says, this paper will look at these 3 topical areas and then recommend applied, solution making based on the management literature, whatever you're using. Because then that says again to the reader, I get it. We have this problem and you're going to look at these themes. And then ultimately you're going to say, and this is how we might address the problem from a leadership standpoint. Sort of, it's a roadmap. It's like the person who's reading understands. And by the way, it's not just me as your instructor, it's anybody that you have to write something for. It gives them sort of a roadmap. It's not like you're driving down the street and there's no signs and you come to a crossroad, right? And it's like, wait a second, nobody has a stop sign. What do I do? Stop signs say stop. There's signs. They say, okay, this is what comes next. You stop, and the other thing will happen, and then you can go on. So think of it that way, like giving the reader a roadmap.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you so much.
Sure. Emma, do you have anything else? It's really
Um,
the end of the hour. Anything new?
Well, I was just reading over my paper real quick, like my formatting, because I have a really hard time turning in anything. I know it was only sections A through C or A
And you
through
know what?
D.
I wanted to say, you said that at the last meeting. You
I
said,
have a I have a very hard time with that. But I did go ahead and put a conclusion in what I had already done. And
I think,
moving
I think
forward,
Anisha did the same thing. And
I just can't leave something open-ended,
no, of
even
course
though I
you
know I'm
can.
going to
I
build
did
on it.
well.
Just
I
don't get
also
too attached to that conclusion. Because
right,
as
and
you
I
write the
knew it was
latter
going to
part, it
change
might need to be
drastically.
changed. Right, exactly.
Right. And I wanted to put more concrete references in there that wrapped up the end, and I was like, but that's not technically the assignment. So
It's
I also
okay.
know
I
what your
think
name
with you,
is.
Emma, what I would say is less is more.
Yeah,
Okay.
can't do that, but I'm working on it. But I also do know what your name is, and I greatly apologize. I copy and paste my
Oh, Karen Schlumps. I
listen,
saw that. I saw that.
I only slept 2 hours that night
I
because I did
understand.
that
I
and I
understand.
panicked all
I
night, and I thought,
respect Karen infinitely, so it was a compliment. Don't
I
worry.
was like, this isn't even, I had 4 windows
The other
open.
course, you have the other course, and
It was
Karen Schlum's
atrocious. I
name,
had
and
an atrocious day, and nobody
what
would
did you
believe
have
me
her
if I
for?
told them.
Biostats?
I had
Oh,
Epidemiology.
well, epi. You had her
epidemiology.
for epi.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay.
So I was trying to close out hers, and I was like, oh, I'll just copy and paste my title. And I was like, I just submitted
It's
that.
okay.
I
It's
told my husband, I said, I just failed my graduate course, and he
No,
told
you
me
did not. I
he
mean,
needed
do
to
you
go, I
think
needed to
that's
go to
why I
sleep. That was
teach
his
graduate
constructive
school is to
criticism.
fail people over things like that? That's hardly the biggest thing on my mind. It's just
Oh, well, I
a
appreciate
good
your
thing to
kindness.
like get people's names right, especially if it's your boss or some big wig or something like that. I mean, no, no worries.
That's where
It's
we're at with
funny. I
that.
went, oh, I think she copied and pasted this cover page from someplace else.
Yeah,
Listen,
I think I had like 2 assignments due
Yeah.
at so it's been a rough
Do
semester.
you have epi this semester?
Yep.
mhm.
They're
Oh.
running at the same time, and
Oh,
this is
that's
the first
interesting. You have
time that this
epi
has
at the
happened.
end. At the end.
It's not fun.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine it would be fun. I would imagine that it would have been more fun if you did epi earlier in your programs and then sort of understood through that lens how all this other stuff works. But that's for a
Yeah,
paid above mine, as they say. So
Same.
agreed. No, but thank you for being so kind
You're
and
welcome.
understanding.
I tried to turn those around as soon as possible because I know you all want to get to the next thing. And we really are at the end of the semester. I mean, it's hard to believe. And when you do submit, I also have to turn those around relatively quickly to get grades in and so forth. So keep up the good work, everyone who might be listening. And if you have any questions, I probably will not post this video for a couple days because we have a few outstanding papers. And I expressed to those students that they should submit their papers first before having access to this, just in fairness to everybody. So probably by the weekend, I hope I'll post it. And then you can go back to it, or those people who were not able to be on the conference call, you can review what we talked about. But thank you, everyone. Good luck. Email me, text, whatever, don't text me. Email me, let me know, if you are running into problems or challenges. Do not lose sleep. Do not get emotionally disturbed. This is a course. You will finish the finish line. It doesn't matter what position you finish in, you're going to finish it. I promise you. So keep me posted in your work, and I look forward to seeing everyone or getting your work again. I'm not sure we'll see each other again, but reading your work and your discussion boards this week. Okay. Have a great night.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Dr. L. See you guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.